Welcome to Dreamy Tales English. I am David. Tonight, we have a special story for you. It's called The Silk Weaver of Suzhou. Suzhou is a city in eastern China that has been called the Venice of the East. Not because of its canals, though it has many of those, but because of its beauty. For over 2,000 years, Suzhou has been famous for one thing above all others: silk. The women of Suzhou have woven silk on wooden looms for generations, creating fabrics so fine they can pass through a wedding ring, so smooth they feel like water against the skin. Our story begins in the workshop of Madame Shan, a 76-year-old silk weaver whose family has been making silk for 8 generations. Madame Shan's workshop is small, barely large enough for her loom and a few spools of thread, but it is filled with color. Rolls of silk hang from the ceiling in shades of crimson, gold, emerald, and sapphire. On the walls are framed pieces of embroidery depicting landscapes, flowers, and birds, each stitch placed with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. Madame Shan sits at her loom every morning from dawn until dusk, her hands moving across the wooden threads with a rhythm that has not changed in 50 years. She does not speak much. When customers ask about the price, she points to a small ledger. When children come to watch her weave, she smiles and lets them touch the silk. And when the afternoon light streams through the window, illuminating the dust motes in the air, she closes her eyes for a moment and listens to the soft clicking of the loom, the sound of a craft that has survived wars, revolutions, and the march of modernity. Xiao was 25 years old when she first walked into Madame Shan's workshop. She was a fashion designer in Shanghai, working for a fast fashion brand that produced thousands of garments every week. Her job was to create designs that would sell quickly and be discarded just as quickly, trendy, colorful, and ultimately meaningless. She had come to Suzhou on a business trip to source materials for her next collection. Her boss had told her to find cheap fabric, polyester, cotton, anything that would look good in photographs but cost almost nothing. But when Xiao walked into Madame Shan's workshop, she knew she had found something completely different. The silk hanging on the walls was not just fabric. It was art. Each piece told a story of the mulberry trees that fed the silkworms, of the women who reeled the cocoons, of the hands that wove the threads on the loom. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply human. Xiao stood in front of a bolt of crimson silk and ran her fingers across its surface. It was warm and soft like skin. She closed her eyes and felt the threads beneath her fingertips. Hundreds of individual strands, each one no thicker than a hair, woven together into something stronger than any of them could be alone. "How much for this?" she asked. Madame Shan looked up from her loom and studied Xiao for a long moment. "You don't want to buy it," she said. "You want to make it." Xiao blinked. "How did you know that?" Madame Shan smiled faintly. "Your hands. They're soft and unmarked. You've never done real work in your life." Xiao felt a sting of embarrassment. She wanted to leave. Instead, she sat down. "Show me," she said. And so Xiao began to learn the art of silk weaving. The process was unlike anything she had ever experienced. First, you had to raise the silkworms, tiny white worms that ate mulberry leaves and spun themselves into cocoons over the course of a month. Then you had to reel the silk from the cocoons by hand, unraveling each one into a single thread no thicker than a human hair. Finally, you had to weave the threads on the loom, crossing the warp and the weft in a pattern that determined the texture, color, and strength of the fabric. Xiao's first attempts were disastrous. The threads broke. The pattern was uneven. The fabric looked more like a child's craft project than a piece of silk. She threw her shuttle across the room in frustration. Madame Shunt did not react. She simply picked up the broken thread, tied it together, and handed it back. Again, she did this 10 more times. Each time, the weaving improved. Each time, Madame Shun's hands moved closer to Xia's, correcting, guiding, teaching. By the end of the first week, Xia's fabric was acceptable. By the end of the second week, it was good. And by the end of the first month, she had woven a small piece of silk that Madame Shun examined closely and nodded at with a rare, satisfied smile. "This one," she said, "is beautiful." Xia held the silk in her hands. It was cool and smooth, with a subtle sheen that caught the light like a jewel. She felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Madame Shun shook her head. "Thank yourself. You did the work." Over the next 3 months, Xia returned to Suzhou every weekend. She woke before dawn, walked to Madame Shun's workshop, and sat at the loom for hours, weaving, unraveling, weaving again. She learned that silk was not just a material. It was a philosophy. The threads were fragile, but together they were strong. The process was slow, but the result was timeless. And the beauty of silk was not in the fabric itself, but in the hands that had made it. One evening, as Xia was packing up her shuttle and thread, Madame Shun handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," she said. Inside was a scarf, hand-woven, crimson, and embroidered with a single character in gold thread. "My beauty." Xia held the scarf to her neck and closed her eyes. It was warm and soft and smelled faintly of mulberry leaves and wood smoke. She felt something in her chest tighten, not pain, but something deeper, something she had been carrying for years without knowing it. "When I was a girl," Madame Shun said softly, "my mother taught me to weave. She said that weaving is not about making fabric. It is about making patience, about learning to slow down, to be present, to create something that will last longer than you." She paused. "Your generation rushes too much. You want everything now. But the best things in life cannot be rushed. Silk cannot be rushed. Love cannot be rushed. And neither can beauty." Xia opened her eyes and looked at Madame Shun. For the first time, she saw the woman not as a craftsman, but as a teacher, one who had spent her life passing on a craft that the world was forgetting. "I won't forget," she said. Madame Shun smiled. "I know." When Xia returned to Shanghai, she did not go back to her job at the fast fashion brand. She submitted her resignation and opened a small studio in the old part of the city, a studio dedicated to slow fashion, to handmade textiles, to the beauty of things made with patience and care. She hired 3 women from Suzhou, silk weavers who had learned the craft from their mothers and grandmothers, and together they created a collection of scarves, shawls, and wraps that took months to produce, not hours. Each piece was unique, each stitch deliberate, and each garment carried with it the memory of Madame Shun's loom and the wisdom of her hands. Her collection was an instant success. Fashion magazines wrote about it. Celebrities wore it. And Xia found herself sitting in interviews, being asked the same question over and over. "How did you come up with this idea?" And each time, she would smile and say, "I learned it from a woman in Suzhou who taught me that the best things in life cannot be rushed. Good night and sweet dreams."